Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks for listening. I'm with Ben Meade. Now, Ben and I have probably not known each other that long, maybe about sort of 5-6 years. I think the last time we met face-to-face was Hotel de Van, I think, in Harrogate.
Very nice.
And I've invited him in today because we've got a few common symptoms that are coming from the CEO, and it's based around data. Now, in terms of the CEOs can't quite put their finger on it, but what they're saying is that they know that their data's not quite right. So I thought, right, what we'll do is we'll do a podcast and we'll get someone in who's an expert in data and maybe talk about that a bit more. But let me give them an overview of you first of all, Ben. You're not just from a data perspective, you're actually a former CIO. You've worked through many different companies, a few different industries, worked your way up to CIO, and then probably over the last, 7-8 years or so, been focused on data, especially for businesses going through planned or forced change. So rapid growth, transformation, M&A, that type of context, that type of environment. But anyway, you probably can introduce yourself better than what I can. So why don't you tell everyone a bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So former CIO, so spent 30 plus years in the corporate world and IT, all the way up to CIO of some quite large organizations and IT director. And then basically in 2022 or later in 2022, I had the opportunity to sort of pull together my own little consultancy. And the area that I focus on is what I call information fitness. And yes, it is all around data strategy, governance and management, and then helping organizations to understand basically, where they might be going a bit wrong with data, and if they have got issues and problems, and helping them to straighten them out and get better value out of it.
Great, thank you. What I find with data, and this is from personal experience of trying to do data in our organization, and we've gone from an analog system to a digital system and then changed the digital system after that. It's kind of sort of the part of the plan, but not really part of the plan. This thing is ever moving, isn't it? We're only a small company. I dread to think what it's like in big companies.
Yeah, and I think the issue nowadays is that every company, well, they've always relied upon data. It's just that with the massive increases in technology and IT and the digital revolution we've been through, the sheer volumes of data that every organisation has to then think about now and process on a day-to-day basis are just massive. And also, it's more fragmented. You've got it across the cloud in different places, and trying to keep track of all that and make sure you're doing it properly and you're not putting yourself at risk is becoming harder. And you hear about a lot of these changes that people do. They talk about digital transformation, and AI now is becoming part of digital transformation as well. Basically people talk about, when they do big changes, they talk about people, processes and technology. But if you forget about the data and you don't, get that right beforehand as part of doing digital transformation, then you're probably going to fail, or at least be very slow, and probably you might even be setting yourself up for a very expensive mistake.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think as well as that, when I'm speaking to companies about AI, and I'm almost sick of talking about AI already, but as we start talking about AI, and it's an important part, I think every business needs to grab it, and if they don't grab it, they are definitely going to get left behind. It's about as big as the internet. It's a big thing.
Yeah.
But of course, like anything else, if you automate something that's not very good, you end up with not a very good end product. And AI is a lot about an element of automation. So I think a lot of CEOs now are thinking, well, I need to get the data right because I need to feed the data into an element of AI, and we need to capture the business benefit from doing that. Oh no, I'm not confident my data is good enough.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of my conversations are going at the moment. It's not it's broken because of this. It's my gut's telling me our data isn't good enough. Is this a common thing that you've seen as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been tracking and talking to people about this for the last couple of years now, and you've had all the hype around AI, and absolutely every organisation needs to really get its head around it and get onto it, or it's going to be risk being left behind. But a lot of these organisations, I've asked the question in a number of different sessions, a number of different places that I've been, and lots of different varied customers, and you find that a lot of them have started with AI. And then they backed out for various reasons, whether it's governance or not being able to trust it, or more commonly, as you say, they suddenly realise exactly what you need to do to get your data in better shape. before you can then really take advantage of AI. Because the ones who do the best are the ones who can find the right AI for a particular use case for benefits, and then they're doing a blend of using the machine learning models with their own internal data to then get more out of it for customer personalization or for making decisions and spotting patterns and things. But it's only as good as the data you put into it. And even worse with AI, you've got the whole training of AI relies upon having, data in, large volumes and diversity if you're going to get the good results out of it and get accuracy and be able to fine tune it to where you want to be. So it is all about data. People talk about data being the fuel for AI, and it's like a car. If you put crap fuel in it, you're not going to get very good performance out of it.
Yeah, very true. And I guess it's very similar to, if you were teaching a kid how to do maths, if you taught them how to do it, but gave them all the wrong answers, it's not going to be a very good, very well-educated kid. And it's almost the same thing. And I draw that comparison because AI is in its infancy. We're just starting out.
Yeah, that's great. Growing up very fast, though.
Yeah, rapidly, which is almost part of the fun. What we decided to do, everyone, is we decided to talk about the 5 symptoms that tell the CEO that their data is not quite right. So this is going back to the gut feel, it's not quite right, and let's look at some of the symptoms. So we'll try and keep them in numbered order, and I'll try and keep some order to this podcast, but we'll probably end up going off in slightly different, some tangents, I'm sure. So first one, conflicting metrics from different departments. So for example, sales reporting different revenue than what finance is saying that the performance is. This is one of the good tells, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I've been in myself at board level in different organisations where you can just see the problems this causes. I mean, as soon as you get that being, what's supposed to be the same data being fed up from 2 different areas of the business, and there's a significant disconnect, then immediately you're into the whole other world of, oh, well, what we're going to have to do now is we're going to have to sort of, we can't trust the data, we can't move forward to make a decision because we're getting 2 different answers. And then you've got to go through the whole cycle of, okay, well, who's right, who's wrong, and usually that involves some sort of tracing back of, okay, well, where did you get that data from? And it can be quite lengthy to then go and iron out, the way in which the different areas have been massaging it or interpreting it to try to get to something which is then useful as an overall key metric for the business as a whole.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Is it worthwhile? I'm trying to think logically how I would look at that if I was in the CEO position of a large company. And I think what I'd be asking is, right, show me where you have to do a manual intervention to make those numbers balance. And then we'll take that exception and then we'll go backwards and reverse engineer that exception and find out where the issue is. Is that a good way to do it?
Yeah, I mean, if it's that important to the business, then there's really no substitute for, tracing the lineage of where you got the data from. And that involves, who's touched it, where was the fundamental data sources, the data sets that you're actually, sourcing the data from in the first place. You kind of hope that they're the same ones. It's not always the same ones. Sometimes you'll find different departments keeping score in a different way to the way that the rest of the organisation is. And then really what you have to do is then you have to trace it forwards in terms of, where you got the data from, who's touched it, what permutations has it gone through. Sometimes you'll find that organisations are spending almost like a little cottage industry of work, producing these figures and pulling them together in a format, taking days per month because they haven't really got themselves properly set up and mature about, key metrics. You really should make sure that you've got them well defined, you've got a common understanding, and basically that you can guarantee that, everyone is nodding and saying, yes, we're happy with the way in which that data has been pulled out of the systems, and it produces a single result that everyone can agree upon.
Great. Thank you. So I think number one is, if we've got conflicting metrics from different departments or different operating companies or something, and we need a manual intervention, that's the first telltale sign that the data is not quite right. And then we go through the process we've just described. Great. Number 2, slow or failing digital transformation initiatives due to poor quality or siloed data. And I guess this comes out when you're trying to do a little bit of AI for the first time, or maybe you've got a new ERP implementation or CRM implementation. That's another indicator, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've seen myself many years, I've seen quite a few situations where people have focused on, okay, well, what's the technology we're buying, and almost doing a lot of evaluation of that and the costs and all the rest of it, and they almost haven't, they almost neglect that, looking at the data behind it. And okay, well, because fundamentally the data you use to run your business, whether it's in one system or another system, is still fundamentally the same data. And if you don't give it the right level of attention, and you don't also make sure that you are connecting it back to who the actual people in the business are, who are the owners of that data set, and get them involved in the decision making, and also thinking about, okay, well, what's going to change in terms of the way that we touch and process that, going from one technology to another technology, then it comes back to what I said at the beginning. People think about, or I talk about people, process, and technology when they're talking about major transformation. My vote would be that you also need to make sure you've got data in there first of all, and also because if you haven't got that data in there as almost your first thing, then you haven't really sort of stepped back and said, okay, well, do we need all that data? Otherwise, you might be sort of moving it all across to another system, and then you're incurring costs and for processing and storage, which you no longer need. And you've got to also think about it from the point of view of, does the data make sure, does it support what you need in terms of decision making, record keeping, and action taking? Sometimes it's easy to get blinded by technology. There's so much of it out there, including AI, that people are focusing on that and not really thinking about, okay, well, fundamentally, it still comes down to the data is the real reason and what I need to protect and make the most of, because that's what helps me as a business to make decisions, take actions, and then track those through appropriate record keeping to see how successful they are.
Yeah, good point. Good point. I think it's the same with siloed, isn't it? Certain opcos or certain business units might do one thing, but then it doesn't integrate in the same way, and all those things. I think, again, if I was thinking about it as a CEO's perspective, I might use KPIs, because KPIs should be common across the whole organization. So it'd be a case of, right, okay, this is a KPI for this. We know that every single operating company needs to do it. We're going to use that as an example to work out the lineage of the data. You opco, give me your numbers. And then how does that feed into the center, and does it have to be manipulated?
Yeah, and I think that's another key point is it's nice if you can do that and define some nice clean requirements for how people need to report, maybe across boundaries of organisations or even departments and whatever. But again, the common thing there, which I've seen and some organisations have struggled with, is that they don't actually define sort of common model, sort of the core business processes that they're trying to measure and how the metrics apply to it. And they end up, if they're not careful, without common terminology or a misunderstanding of terminology. And I've seen that a number of times at the top of organisations, where people will be using, phrases and words and nodding as if they understand each other. But when you dig a little bit deeper, you say, what do you really mean by that? Then you realise they've got wildly different understanding of that particular term. And if that's relating to a KPI and you haven't got something written down, which everyone can say, yes, we agree on that, and then publish that across the organisation or organisations that you're trying to work to behave in the same way, then you haven't really got that common understanding and alignment, which then supports the KPIs being meaningful within that business context. So having that top level model, core business process model, I call it the business context when I'm working with clients, is really important, because it's just that, the highest level view and that agreement on how does the business work, and it gives that blueprint for how you measure things, and also how you want to align reporting and your IT to support it as well.
Yeah, good point. Good point. I think for point two, use a KPI that the whole organization has to report on. I'll look at the different operating units, business units, and how they're compiling that number and presenting that number. And that will give you a good indicator of whether this, digital transformation, this enterprise-wide digital sort of data hierarchy is the same. And if it's not, it's time to put that right. But start with the KPI.
Yeah, you got. If it's the same core business processes across different units, then you want to be measuring like with like.
Yep, agreed. Okay, that's number two. Number three, customer experience failures. I think everyone's going to be able to relate to this when they've been a customer. But I think ultimately the B2B customer expectations are just the same as the B2C customer expectation nowadays. So I think it's a really important point, especially as well for B2B, that if the customer data is inaccurate or the business got a fragmented view of the customer, there's poor personalization, And this is point 3, isn't it? These are all symptoms that say to the CEO, the data's not quite right.
Yeah, if you can't form, I mean, in data management terms, they talk about master data, and customer as a master data concept and entity is probably one of the most important ones for any business. If you can't achieve that clear understanding and view and tracking of your customer, and make sure you can rely upon that data and everyone understands how important it is to keep that up to date across CRM, ERP, or whatever systems you've got, then you've got a real problem and a real challenge. And customer data going stale nowadays it changes so quickly, and if you can't do the personalization as well that people are expecting, it's a very noisy world out there in terms of how much information people get bombarded with. You want to make it relevant to them. That's the only way really in which you can sort of stay in touch and stay engaged, and try and make sure that you get the most out of the offer that you might be having to your customers.
Yeah, I agree. I think the customer experience is key. We've only got to look at, Apple back in the day, Amazon sort of more recently. The ones that make customers key are the ones that tend to do well for the longer term. I mean, we'll see with Amazon, but it's looking well so far, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I think, again, another way for the CEO to investigate could be if they take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe customer complaints a week, look at that one customer complaint with an idea of how do we make sure our systems and processes, so therefore the data behind them, are suitable for these customers. Let's start with the exceptions. It's a great opportunity to pick up the phone to the customer anyway and speak to them. It's pretty powerful if it comes from a member of the board. But if you look at someone like, let's say, Elon Musk, and I know he's a decisive figure, but when people recommend stuff on X for him to have a look at, he gets someone to have a look at that and he responds directly and it gets fixed. That's a great way to be a CEO, isn't it? It's a great leader trait.
It is, and it is showing that willingness to engage with the front line and with the challenges and the problems. I mean, you stay in touch with the people who matter, who are the customers. And if you can do that and use that to sort of, review and then streamline some of your processes within the organization and resolve them, then absolutely you're going to give your customers a much better experience. And you look at some of the firms out there like Octopus, or I use Zen Internet from a personal point of view. They're winning the game based upon customer service, not cutting the price and everything. They're doing it purely on being the best at customer service, and that's what they're focusing on.
Well, let's be honest, the businesses that do the best customer service, unless it's like a Dyson product that's innovative and it's changed the world type of thing, it's always down to customer service. And I think again it's great to use an exception, and the exception in this case would be a customer complaint, to look at how data has supported that customer all the way through, and that will show you where the gaps are.
Yeah, and typically what I do, and I help organisations do this across all sorts of shapes and sizes and sectors, is that what I call their major data flows, I help them to understand that better. So, looking at the customer journey, making sure they've got the clear view and the understanding of that, and then really, where it's really important or it's going wrong perhaps, then to map in a lot more detail with almost like a swim lane diagram. Okay, how does that data come into the organisation from customers? Where's the touch points internally? Which teams and systems does it go into? Where's the data stored? Where does you use third parties, which lots of people do nowadays in the cloud and whatever? And then how do you, where are the pain points? Where's the heat within that where it's going wrong? And if you can do that and make it visible and make it understandable as a bridge between the business and IT, and then you've really got quite a powerful tool for everyone to be able to get around and think about, okay, well, what do we do about if the as-is isn't working quite right? How do we tweak it and make it better? And then you can maintain these sort of things internally to help you grow and scale and make changes faster and more confidently as well.
Yeah, okay, great. So that's point 3 taken care of. We look at the customer, and someone in a board position takes responsibility for that, and probably with the help of someone like yourself, we reverse engineer where the problems, the exceptions are, and then we find out where the data breakages are and what the problem is, and could it have been fixed without human intervention, maybe. Number 4, unexpected attention from the UK ICO. Now, data processing, breaches, failure, this has become a hot topic, especially with cyber included as well, over the last at least 6 weeks, but probably more likely the last sort of couple of years. this is a big thing, isn't it? I don't like too much to talk about this kind of thing because I just hope it's all safe and works in the background, and I'm more interested in the more commercial side. But actually, it's an important part that we need to talk about, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it is becoming, I think, more commercial nowadays as well, because the way that's coming through, and there's quite a few of the clients I work with, they've come to me because they're getting asked questions by people who want to work with them or be their customers, and it's parts of bids and tenders. And basically, they're saying, as part of their almost like their due diligence questions up front, they're saying, okay, well, how do you look after personal data if I'm going to share some of it with you? And it can be a qualifying question, which then means it doesn't go any further if you don't answer properly. One of my biggest clients, basically, that's exactly what I did for them. They didn't have a credible answer. I helped them put in place a suitable international data protection and privacy framework, so that then they understood it, they could operate it, and basically they were then confident that if they had any of these questions in bids and tenders going forward, then it's a straightforward answer. And then generally, I think people obviously had the big panic and the rush in 2018 when GDPR came in, and everyone started creating something which looked like it might do the job. But I think what you're seeing now is people are realizing that actually there's wider benefits than that. If you can understand your data flows properly, and your personal data is one type of data flow through the organization, then you can also, if you can get a grip of them, not only are you assuring yourself and anyone who might be concerned about that you're doing the right things and you're unlikely to become a reputational risk if they trust you with their data. You only have to look at some of the large retail examples in the UK and the impact it's had on their bottom line in terms of the impact if you get this wrong. The other thing it also does, if you do this right and use the sort of methods that I talk about to understand your key data sets and rank them in terms of their importance to the business and make sure you know where the personal data is, then you can also apply more selectively the controls that you put in place to just make sure that you are in a good position. So you can be a bit more nuanced and granular and focused rather than just having a one-size-fits-all approach and attempt with the cybersecurity, which can be very expensive if you're deploying the highest spec everywhere. So lots there, but it basically comes down to trust. Are you confident as a CEO that you understand and you've got that sort of structure underneath there within your, can someone show you in sort of a nice documented format, basically where your personal data is flowing? And are you confident that the right people are owning that? Because ownership's key here for these data sets and are involved in decisions around it so they keep it safe.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a good point. I think I'd only thought about it from a non-commercial perspective. But as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking that, we have a lot of customers that are B2B, or they would describe themselves as B2G. So they're getting contracts from the government. And, some of these TCVs, so total contract values, are huge. These are in the billions type thing. You bet your bottom dollar that the government's going to be pretty keen on making sure the data's tight and making sure it's dealt with ethically. That might be a good way for any CEO, regardless of whether they work with the government or not. Look at the component part of a government bid document. So pretend they're doing a B2B or B2G, they're putting in a bid to the government, and then see what questions the government's asking in terms of their data integrity, data quality, data safety. Maybe use that as a benchmark, even if they've got no intention to go into B2G.
Yep. Absolutely. I mean, you'll see this. I mean, everyone's aware of the mega trends out there. Everyone has to use the cloud because it's economically makes it viable for IT digital services, but it means you've got a much more fragmented digital supply chain out there, which is much more potentially vulnerable and it's hard to keep track of. Everyone's aware of cyber attacks and threats. And as a result of that, you will see, I'm already seeing it with a lot of my clients, and it will just continue, that as part of due diligence, whether it's becoming a customer of another company and selecting a supplier, the questions will start to go up. And you're also seeing it in other spaces as well. You're seeing it where you're looking at PE firms or other organizations acquiring companies, the level of due diligence there will start going up. And even with insurance renewals and things like that, then you're going to start to see more pointed and more targeted questions in this sort of space about, do you really understand and are you in control of the data that you process? Because everyone is increasingly aware of the risks and the expectations are going up. So I think it's a trend that will continue, and I think it's one that absolutely, I mean, I provide a on my website and generally for clients, I provide a sort of a basic, what I call information fitness assessment, which basically allows people to go and almost like self-assess, where am I at and are there things that I should be concerned about and thinking about going forwards. But absolutely, that it is something that's not going to go away. It's only going to get more and more important, particularly as AI gathers pace and different organisations and regulations coming in. I mean, AI is still in the early stages of being regulated, probably.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think in terms of as we're highlighting the symptoms, this is number 4. I think that that control and that making sure you're compliant is one aspect of it. But if you think about it from a commercial perspective, would the business be confident to go and bid on a piece of work? And would it hold up under scrutiny? The same with a potential sale, especially for our private equity-backed businesses that need to be sale ready. Would it hold up to scrutiny? That's a really good test if the CEO's thinking that the data's not quite right. Great.
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
Thank you. Number 5, the last one. I think we've got an element of unclear data ownership that really does make a difference. And if the CEO's thinking the data's not quite right, the first port of call should be the person that owns the whole data. Now, in some organizations, that's not someone who's separate, that's not their only role. It could be that it's part of, a lot of other responsibilities that they have. Do you find that?
So I guess I've got a number of views on that. The first one is almost the one that prompted me to sort of see the value in this and start ring fence in the first place. Is that as someone who's been CIO and IT director in quite a few places, I used to get a bit fed up at times of the fact that just because I had information in my job title, everyone thought I was responsible for data quality. And I guess that's part of the mission of what I'm trying to do. Is I'm trying to make sure that people see data and key data sets as being business critical assets, which you need to think about in the same way you would do the key people, the key technologies, the key facilities, or technologies that you bring in. Anything else that's regarded as business critical, you would make sure you're thinking about and looking after it regularly, thinking about the value it generates and how you protect it. And I think that's exactly the same sort of model of ownership I'm sort of advocating, is that you can't assume that people in IT are going to look after data. They look after the information plumbing, the pipes, the reservoirs, the engines that drive the information through the business. But fundamentally, data is only there to support decision-making, action-taking, or record-keeping. And the only people who can actually define and own that and make a judgment, on what sort of value it's creating are the right people in the business. And hopefully the most senior people in the business are seeing that as their, responsibility and their owners for it. So definitely very much part of the approach I take and the philosophy I take is about, once you've identified the most important key data sets, then it's about linking them back to the appropriate owners and stewards in the business and helping with the education and the culture to turn that around and make sure that top level management, the CEO or anyone else, can then have confidence that there's a very clear ownership for each of these data sets that might be out there, which is essential to the business. And then it makes life so much simpler, whether it's a data quality issue, whether it's about talking about an investment in security or anything else, or there's a data protection problem, then you know who to work with. And because, very rarely do you find that data quality issues can be fixed by technology or IT. It usually involves having someone in the business agree to do something differently in terms of their people and training, or change the processes, or as well as putting perhaps a bit more tech in place to make sure you've got clean quality data that you can trust.
Yep, agreed. I think to finish off sort of point 5, if the CEO is a little worried that the data is not quite right, then go and speak to the person that has responsibility and ownership for the data. If that person's not easy to find, and therefore they've got other day jobs and things like that, then consider having someone that's fully responsible for it. But I think your point is true as well in terms of former CEO, former IT director. Don't necessarily assume that it's going to be the individual that's sat in IT. Think about this from a commercial perspective. What's the data worth to you? What kind of person do you want in there, making sure they're responsible for the data, and then you've got a central port of call. So
yeah, I mean, you go back to our earlier point about customer data and customer experience. I mean, unless people who are in the commercial teams or the sales teams are, and the people who are leading those teams understand the value of that data and take ownership of it, then it's not going to be good quality, and you are going to end up with this fragmented view of the customer. And the thing I find with a lot of organisations is that they haven't really thought about how do you form this view and build into their governance structures this sort of fundamental information fitness that I'm talking about, which makes sure that you have got clarity on who the owners are for all of the key data sets, and that is published and everyone knows it, as well as things like these, the core business process model and understanding your information plumbing, and also making sure that it's not just something you do as a one-off. This is something that you like health and safety and other things, where you have to then make sure that you just keep an eye on it and maintain it, so that as people come and go in organisations as they do, you don't end up with data being orphaned or without having a clear owner, because that way it'll just sort of die and wither or not get the value out of it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that sort of commercial viewpoint, ownership viewpoint, it's your responsibility type viewpoint. I think they're all really important. At the start of the conversation, we said we're going to talk about 5 symptoms that tell the CEO that data's not quite right. I think we covered that. I think we covered all 5 in that. And it took us a while to get this down to 5, didn't it? Because there is lots and lots of things that we could have spoke about. But I'm hoping for everyone that's listening that that's just a really clear, sort of succinct 5 examples of where you can look at your data and just get some more assurance and make sure it's of the quality that you would expect, your investors would expect, and your customers would expect.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much for your time, Ben, and I'll see you soon. Thanks. Bye.
Bye now.